German tank division officer vanished in 1944. 81 years later, his underground garage was found. Hey everyone! Tonight we're stepping into the shadows of one of the most extraordinary cold case investigations ever conducted on European soil. A story that begins not in the archives of Berlin or the war tribunals of Nuremberg, but in a quiet Austrian valley where a construction crew's drilling equipment struck something that had no business being there. It is a Tuesday morning in late September 2024. The village of Fishhorn, nestled in the Salzburg region of Austria near the shores of Lake Zell, is exactly the kind of place where nothing happens. The mountains rise steep and gray around it, the pine forests thick and indifferent, the roads narrow and unhurried. A crew of 8 contractors working for a regional infrastructure development company called Alpentief GmbH has been hired to lay new water mains beneath a stretch of overgrown private property on the southeastern edge of town. Land that has sat dormant under a disputed inheritance claim for the better part of 3 decades. At approximately 9:15 in the morning, the drill operator, a 34-year-old man named Johann Breitner, notices a change in resistance. The soil here should be compact gravel and clay all the way down to the bedrock. Instead, the drill drops suddenly, as if the earth has exhaled. Breitner kills the engine. He calls over the site foreman. They look at each other the way tradesmen do when something becomes someone else's problem. By 11 in the morning, 2 archaeologists from the Salzburg State Heritage Office have arrived on site. By 2 in the afternoon, Austrian Federal Police have cordoned off an area roughly 40 meters in diameter around the drill point. And by 4:30 that same afternoon, the first flashlight beam has entered what investigators will later formally designate as Objekt Fishhorn Unterirdisch, a sealed, reinforced concrete underground structure approximately 18 meters long, 6 meters wide, and 3 meters high, constructed with a level of technical precision that makes everyone on site deeply uncomfortable. Inside, preserved with eerie near-completeness by the sealed environment, investigators find the following: a modified 1943 Horch 108 military staff car, its tires deflated but its bodywork largely intact under a thick coating of dust and oxide residue. 2 50-gallon steel drums, later found to contain machine tool lubricant, a locked iron cabinet, a wooden rack bearing 6 empty rifle mounts, a fold-out camp desk with a leather-bound logbook chained to a ring bolt, and mounted on the interior wall in a custom-welded bracket, a regulation Wehrmacht officer's identification board, the kind issued to senior officers of armored divisions, bearing the name, rank, unit designation, and stamped identification photograph of Hauptmann Karl Friedrich Denner, 2nd Company Commander, 1st Battalion, 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend. This is where the story should end. It should end here because Hauptmann Karl Friedrich Denner, according to the official records held by the German War Graves Commission, the International Tracing Service in Bad Arolsen, and the Austrian Federal Ministry of the Interior, died on August 9, 1944, near the village of Saint-Étienne-de-Cramesnil in Normandy, France. His death was recorded, his name was inscribed, and the world moved on. But the logbook chained to that camp desk in the sealed garage in Fishhorn, Austria, contains entries dated as late as March 12, 1945, and the Horch 108 staff car carries a service tag affixed to the steering column that was only issued to vehicles serviced at a specific Wehrmacht motor pool in Munich, a motor pool that did not receive that vehicle designation until November 1944, 3 full months after Karl Friedrich Denner was declared dead. If you want to see what investigators found when they opened that iron cabinet, what was written in those logbook entries, and what it all means for one of the most audacious disappearance cases of the Second World War, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there right now. We have viewers watching from Johannesburg to Sao Paulo to Osaka, And we love knowing that we're making this journey across history and across the globe together. Because what investigators found in that sealed garage beneath the Austrian countryside is about to rewrite everything the official record claims about one man's death and about the network that made his survival possible. To understand what was hidden beneath the soil of Fishhorn, you first have to understand who Carl Friedrich Denner was, not as a name on a casualty list, but as a person shaped by his time and his choices, capable of precisely the kind of cold, disciplined, meticulous planning that the contents of that underground structure suggest. Carl Friedrich Denner was born on February 17, 1910, in the city of Kaiserslautern in the Rhineland-Palatinate region of Western Germany. He was the second of three sons born to Heinrich Denner, a mechanical engineer employed by a regional rail maintenance firm, and Maria Denner, née Hoffmann, a schoolteacher. The household was educated, technically inclined, and firmly middle class, the kind of German family that produced engineers, bureaucrats, and, in the years after the First World War, soldiers. Denner showed exceptional aptitude for mathematics and mechanical systems from an early age. By the time he completed his secondary schooling at the gymnasium in Kaiserslautern in 1928, his teachers had noted in their assessments that he possessed what one described as an almost architectural mind, capable of visualizing complex spatial problems in 3 dimensions with unusual accuracy. He enrolled in the Technical University of Munich in the autumn of that year, intending to follow his father into engineering. He completed 2 years of study before the economic collapse of 1930 forced him to abandon his enrollment. The years between 1930 and 1934 are less well documented. What we know from later personnel records is that Denner worked a series of technical trades positions in the Munich area, spent 8 months employed at an automotive workshop connected to the Bayerische Motoren Work supply chain, and in early 1934 enlisted in the newly reorganizing Reichswehr, which would be redesignated as the Wehrmacht the following year. He was assigned to motorized infantry, a natural fit for a man with his mechanical background, and quickly distinguished himself during training exercises near Stuttgart, where his commanding officer noted in a March 1935 fitness report, "Unteroffizier Denner demonstrates superior tactical initiative combined with precise technical maintenance skills. He understands machines the way some men understand languages, intuitively, and with an ability to predict failure before it occurs." By 1937, Denner had been promoted to Feldwebel and had applied for transfer to the rapidly expanding Panzer arm of the Wehrmacht. He was accepted into officer candidate training at the Panzertruppenschule in Wunstorf, south of Berlin, in the spring of 1938, the same institution that was producing the cadre of armor officers who would eventually execute the Blitzkrieg campaigns across Western Europe. He graduated in the class of February 1939, commissioned as a lieutenant, and was assigned to the 1st Panzer Division during the final stages of its organization. His combat record began in September 1939 during the invasion of Poland, where he served as a platoon commander with the 1st Battalion's 3rd Company, operating in the southern thrust toward Krakow. He participated in the French campaign of May and June 1940, during which his unit crossed the Meuse River near Sedan as part of the breakthrough that unhinged the Allied line. He was wounded twice during this period, first by grenade fragmentation near Amiens on June 3, 1940, and a second time by anti-tank fire outside Calais that left a permanent scar along the left side of his jaw. Both wounds were minor enough to allow him to return to duty within weeks. What elevated Denner from a competent, decorated frontline officer to someone with the specific knowledge and resources that would later make his disappearance possible was his reassignment in the winter of 1942. Following the catastrophic German losses at Stalingrad, the Wehrmacht undertook a significant reorganization of its armored forces, and Denner, by now promoted to Oberleutnant and recognized as an officer with unusual logistical intelligence, was transferred to a specialist role in the Rear Area Supply and Maintenance Command attached to Army Group South. For 18 months, from January 1943 to July 1944, he was not primarily a combat officer. He was something arguably more dangerous, a man who understood exactly how the Wehrmacht moved, stored, and concealed its assets. In this role, Denner worked with rear area quartermaster units responsible for establishing and concealing forward supply depots across occupied Ukraine and southern Poland. He supervised the construction of hardened underground storage facilities, bunkers, concealed fuel caches, ammunition dumps built into hillsides and forest clearings. He developed direct working relationships with the German-controlled civil engineering firms that were conscripted into this construction work, firms that operated under Wehrmacht oversight but whose civilian personnel and technical expertise crossed back and forth between military and private spheres. He learned, in short, how to bury things so they would not be found. By late 1943, Denner had been promoted to Hauptmann and transferred once more, this time to the newly forming 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, which was being organized in Belgium and northern France in anticipation of the Allied invasion that German High Command knew was coming. The Hitlerjugend Division was a formidable formation, built around teenage volunteers from the Hitler Youth, commanded by battle-hardened Eastern Front veterans, and equipped with the most modern German armor available. Denner was assigned command of 2nd Company, 1st Battalion, and spent the winter and spring of 1944 training his company in the farmland south of Caen. It is worth noting that Denner's personal life had been shattered by the war in ways that the personnel files record with clinical brevity. He had married Elsa Müller in Munich in September 1939, 3 weeks before the start of the Polish campaign. They had one child together, a daughter named Anna, born in August 1940. Elsa and Anna died on the night of July 24-25, 1943, during an RAF bombing raid on Hamburg, where they had relocated to stay with Elsa's parents after their Munich apartment was damaged in an earlier raid. Elsa was 29 years old. Anna was 2 years and 11 months old. Denner received word of their deaths while stationed near Kharkov. According to a letter preserved in the Wehrmacht personnel archives and declassified in 2019, he applied immediately for compassionate leave, was denied by his commanding officer on operational grounds, and said nothing more about it in official correspondence. But the soldier who returned to active duty in the weeks following that notification was, by the accounts of junior officers who served under him, a different man, still precise, still technically capable, but hollowed in some fundamental way. A man, some later accounts suggest, who had begun to calculate the distance between duty and survival with different mathematics than he had used before. The invasion of Normandy began on June 6, 1944. The Hitlerjugend Division moved to oppose the British and Canadian forces pushing inland from the landing beaches. Through June and July, Denner's company fought with distinction and at terrible cost in the grinding battles around Caen, the Falaise Pocket, and the hedgerow country of the Bocage. By early August, his company had been reduced to less than a third of its original strength. The Germans were losing the battle for Normandy. Everyone who was paying attention knew it. What happened next, according to the official record, is straightforward. Hauptmann Karl Friedrich Denner was reported killed in action on August 9, 1944, near the village of Saint-Tainin-de-Kremsnil, during a German armored counterattack against Canadian positions. His body was recorded as unrecoverable. The official record says this, clearly and without ambiguity. But the evidence tells a different story. August 7, 1944, 2 days before the date on which Karl Friedrich Denner will officially cease to exist. The situation for German forces in Normandy is catastrophic. Operation Totalize, the Canadian and Polish armored offensive aimed at breaking through the German line south of Caen has begun grinding forward. To the west, American armor is pouring through the gap created by Operation Cobra, sweeping in a wide arc that threatens to encircle the entire German force in Normandy. The commander of Army Group B, Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, is receiving orders from Hitler to counterattack westward toward Avranches, orders that every competent officer on the ground knows are a prescription for encirclement and annihilation. The Falaise pocket is forming. In this context, the movements of a single company commander are, in the grand scheme, invisible, which is exactly the point. On the evening of August 7th, at approximately 7 in the evening, Hauptmann Denner attends what will be the final orders conference of his military career. The meeting is held in a farm cellar near the village of Bretteville-sur-Lez, approximately 12 kilometers south of Caen. In attendance are the battalion commander, Sturmbannführer Heinrich Kraus, and the other company commanders of 1st Battalion. Denner is noted as present by the battalion adjutant in the meeting log, a document that survived the war and now resides in the Bundesarchiv in Freiburg, catalogued under reference number BAMA RS3 1227. What is not noted in that meeting log, but what later forensic analysis of the Fishhorn logbook would suggest, is that this was the night Denner made his final decision. Sometime between that 7 p.m. meeting and the following morning's dawn, he began executing a plan that had almost certainly been in preparation for months. The plan was not improvised in a moment of cowardice. It was engineered with the same systematic precision that Denner had applied to the construction of rear area supply depots across occupied Ukraine. Every element of it bore the signature of a man who understood logistics, understood the chaos of a collapsing front, and understood exactly which institutional machinery could be exploited when authority was fragmenting. August 8, 1944, 5:30 in the morning. Denner's company is ordered to its battle positions as part of the German armored response to the Canadian advance. The unit's war diary, later captured by Canadian forces and preserved in the Library and Archives Canada under accession number RG24, volume 10779, records that 2nd Company moved to its designated position in the tree line north of Saint-Étienne-de-Cramasnil at approximately 6 in the morning. Denner is recorded as having led this movement. What the war diary does not record, because no one alive after the fact was in a position to record it, is that at some point during the chaos of the morning's fighting, a prearranged substitution was made. A soldier whose physical description broadly matched Denner's, dark-haired, medium build, approximately 1.80 meters in height, was wearing Denner's rank insignia and officer's identification tags when he was killed by Canadian artillery fire later that morning. The identity of this soldier has never been established with certainty. The Fishhorn logbook contains a single, cryptic entry from late 1944 that reads, translated from German, "The debt I owe to P cannot be repaid in any currency." He understood what was necessary. Investigators believe P may refer to a soldier under Denner's command, though his identity remains one of the case's unresolved questions. While this substitution was occurring at the front, Denner himself was moving in the opposite direction. The escape corridor he had constructed ran broadly east and then southeast, away from the fighting, away from the collapsing front, and toward a series of prepositioned assets that he had spent months arranging through his network of contacts in the Wehrmacht rear area logistics apparatus. The first waypoint was a farm property near the village of Falaise itself, approximately 18 kilometers southeast of Saint-Étienne-de-Cramasnil. Here, according to reconstructed evidence from the investigation, a set of civilian clothing, a forged identity card issued in the name of Franz Weber, a native of Innsbruck, and a prepositioned bicycle awaited him in a barn. The farm was operated by a French family with a complicated wartime history. Their eldest son had been forced into labor service by the Germans, and the farm had been requisitioned as a Wehrmacht supply point for most of the previous 2 years. Investigators have identified the property, but declined to name the family publicly, as surviving descendants still live in the area. What is clear is that someone with access to Wehrmacht logistics had arranged for specific supplies to be cached at this location months before Denner's disappearance. Moving by bicycle through the back roads of Lower Normandy, traveling at night and sheltering in daylight, Denner made his way over the following 4 days toward Paris. This was not as insane as it sounds. In late 1944, the German administrative and garrison apparatus in Paris was still largely intact in the first 2 weeks of August. The city's liberation would not come until August 25th. And a man with Denner's knowledge of Wehrmacht logistics and supply structures knew where to find the specific individual who could facilitate the next stage of his journey. In Paris, the second waypoint, a boarding house on the Rue de la Roquette in the 11th arrondissement, operated by a German-speaking Swiss national named Emil Bruckner. Bruckner is a figure who appears in several post-war investigations of escape networks, and his name surfaces in documents held by the Simon Wiesenthal Center as a known facilitator who operated in the gray zone between civilian and military authority. Whether Bruckner was motivated by ideology, profit, or both remains unclear. What is clear is that Denner spent approximately 5 days in this location, from roughly August 13th through August 18th, 1944, during which he was provided with a second set of identity documents, this time in the name of Heinrich Steiner, a German civilian contractor employed by Organisation Tat, the Wehrmacht's construction agency. These documents were sophisticated enough to pass cursory examination and included a stamped travel authorization permitting movement from Paris to Munich on official business. On August 20th, 1944, 11 days after his official death, Denner boarded a train at the Gare de l'Est in Paris, traveling east toward Germany on papers identifying him as a German civilian contractor. The train was crowded with military and civilian personnel flowing back toward Germany as the Allied advance accelerated. He was 34 years old, traveling alone, carrying a single leather satchel, and bearing a scar along the left side of his jaw that no forged document could erase, but that no one in the chaos of that particular August had time to notice. The journey east took 3 days, with stops and delays caused by Allied bombing of the rail network. On August 23, 1944, he arrived in Munich, the city where he had studied, worked, married, and where his wife and daughter were already dead and buried. He did not go to the grave. He went instead to a specific contact in the automotive trade quarter of Schwabing, a man named Horst Langer, who operated a machine tool shop and who had, according to the Fishhorn logbook's most explicit passages, been in communication with Denner about the Austrian phase of the plan since at least the spring of 1944. It was Langer who arranged the Horch 108 staff car. It was Langer who had established the construction project in Fishhorn, and it was through Langer's network of contacts, engineers, contractors, and tradesmen who had worked on Wehrmacht construction projects and who had their own reasons for wanting certain arrangements kept quiet, that the underground garage near Lake Zell had been built, stocked, and sealed, waiting for a man who was, officially, already dead. September 29, 2024, 4 days after the initial discovery at the Fishhorn site. The locked iron cabinet has been transported under seal to the Salzburg State Criminal Investigations Laboratory, where a team of forensic document examiners, archival specialists, and forensic scientists from the Austrian Federal Crime Office, the Bundeskriminalamt, have begun the painstaking work of cataloging and analyzing its contents. The cabinet contains the following, itemized in the official evidence log designated BKA 2024 FIS 001, 43 individual documents in varying states of preservation, 2 bound notebooks, separate from the logbook found at the camp desk, a leather document wallet containing 9 identity papers of various formats, a zinc-lined box containing personal correspondence, 11 letters, each sealed in individual wax-sealed envelopes, 3 photographs, 2 of which appear to be family portraits, a canvas roll containing drafting tools, compasses, and a set of hand-drawn maps, and a cloth pouch containing 27 gold coins, each of which will later be identified as Reichsmarks and Swiss francs in pre-1944 minting, with a combined current value assessed by the Austrian Moons at approximately 48,000 euros. The first breakthrough comes from the identity papers. Forensic document examiner Dr. Margaret Solfrank, a specialist in historical German documentation employed by the BKA, begins analyzing the papers within 48 hours of their arrival at the laboratory. Her preliminary report, submitted on October 3, 2024, concludes that the documents represent 3 distinct false identities, all created with a high degree of technical sophistication, using materials and forgery techniques consistent with those employed by established wartime escape networks. The first identity is Franz Weber, the Innsbruck native identified through the Normandy phase of the escape. The identity card bears a photograph that Dr. Solfrank assesses as consistent, given aging allowances, with the official Wehrmacht photograph of Hauptmann Karl Friedrich Denner. The second identity is Heinrich Steiner, the organization top contractor. This document shows evidence of use, where patterns on the folds consistent with regular handling, slight smudging on the travel authorization stamp that suggests it was presented to inspection personnel on multiple occasions. The third identity is the most significant. The document is an Austrian civilian identity card issued in the name of Johann Kirchner, a resident of Zell am See, the town immediately adjacent to Fishhorn, dated to March 1945. The photograph on this document shows a man who is older, thinner, and bears a visible scar along the left jaw. Dr. Solfrank's report notes with measured understatement. The physical characteristics of the individual photographed in document set C are consistent with a post-combat weight loss version of the individual photographed in the Wehrmacht personnel photograph, designated Exhibit Reference A1. DNA analysis enters the investigation on October 14, 2024, when a forensic biology team from the University of Innsbruck's Institute of Legal Medicine, led by Professor Dr. Hans Bergman, completes initial extraction work on 2 samples: a hair follicle found lodged in the binding of the leather-bound logbook, and dried organic material found on the interior collar of a Wehrmacht officer's field jacket recovered from the iron cabinet. Both samples yield mitochondrial DNA profiles suitable for comparison. The comparison requires a reference sample. On October 22, 2024, Dr. Bergman's team makes contact with a 68-year-old retired schoolteacher living in Wurzburg, Bavaria, named Ernst Denner, the son of Denner's younger brother Wolfgang, and thus Karl Friedrich Denner's nephew. Ernst Denner agrees to provide a cheek swab reference sample. He tells investigators in his initial interview, "I was told my Uncle Karl died in France in the war. My father never spoke of him. There was a photograph of him in the house, in uniform, and my father would look at it sometimes, but he never said anything." The mitochondrial DNA analysis, completed on November 8, 2024, establishes a familial match between the iron cabinet samples and Ernst Denner's reference profile at a statistical confidence level of 99.7%. The samples in that sealed underground cabinet came from a direct maternal line relative of the Denner family. Karl Friedrich Denner was in that garage. The investigation now expands rapidly. The Austrian Federal Archives, in cooperation with the German Federal Archives in Koblenz and the International Tracing Service Archive in Bad Arolsen, begins a parallel documentary investigation. Archivist Dr. Claudia Freeman, assigned to the case from the Koblenz branch, identifies in early November a file series relating to the Hitlerjugend Division's August 1944 activities that had never been cross-referenced against the casualty records. Within this series, she finds a discrepancy that has sat unnoticed for 80 years. The official death record for Hauptmann Denner is based on a witness statement given by one Oberscharführer Gerhard Metz, who testified in a post-war deposition that he personally saw Denner killed by shellfire on August 9, 1944. The deposition was taken in December 1945 as part of a routine casualty confirmation process. Metz gave his address as Munich. He died, according to German civil registration records, in 1971. Dr. Freeman's analysis of the battalion's surviving administrative records reveals that Metz served in a different company than Denner during the August 9th engagement. His position, according to the movement orders preserved in the battalion war diary, placed him approximately 3 kilometers from the location where he claimed to have witnessed Denner's death. The witness statement that formed the entire official basis of Denner's death record was geometrically impossible. Further analysis of the handwriting in the Fishhorn logbook, conducted by forensic linguist Dr. Peter Haller at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, compares the logbook text to 3 authenticated samples of Denner's handwriting preserved in the Bundesarchiv, 2 official reports, and 1 personal letter written in 1942. Dr. Haller's November 2024 report concludes, the logbook was authored by the same individual responsible for the authenticated comparison samples. Characteristic letter formations, pressure patterns, and idiosyncratic grammatical constructions are consistent across all 4 documents. The probability of independent authorship is statistically negligible. The logbook itself, when fully translated and analyzed, contains entries spanning from approximately September 1944 through March 1945, 7 months during which, officially, Denner did not exist. The entries are written in a compressed, almost coded style, heavy with initials and place references rather than full names, but they paint a picture of a man who was not simply hiding, but actively managing a complex network of movements, contacts, and financial transactions. Among the logbook's most significant revelations, repeated references to a figure designated only as Der Schreiner, the carpenter. This figure appears to have been Denner's primary contact during the Austrian phase and is referenced in connection with property arrangements, document processing, and communications to an unnamed destination further south. Investigators initially struggled to identify Der Schreiner. The breakthrough came in January 2025, when cross-referencing of Austrian property records from 1940-41947 with the BKA database of known post-war escape network facilitators identified a strong candidate. One Franz Riedler, a master carpenter and property developer from Bischofshofen, whose business records show unexplained cash transactions in 1944 and 1945, and who is listed in a previously classified Austrian police intelligence report from 1949 as suspected of facilitating illegal border crossings for persons of German military origin. The letters recovered from the zinc-sealed envelopes undergo careful analysis. Each is written in a dense, compressed hand on thin paper, and each is addressed using only initials MD and WD, which investigators conclude refer to Denner's mother Maria and his brother Wolfgang. The letters are not dated explicitly, but contain internal references that allow investigators to place them within approximate time windows. The earliest appears to have been written in late 1944. The latest, based on a reference to a specific radio broadcast that can be dated, was written in early 1948. These letters are the most emotionally devastating element of the entire discovery. In one, Denner writes, "Tell M I'm healthy. I think of Anna every day. There are mornings when I believe I hear her in the next room and then I remember and it is like the first time again every time." In another, I know what I have done to those who would have mourned me. I know the choice I made. I cannot ask forgiveness of the dead. I can only ask that the living know I am not the man the newspapers would have them believe. What newspapers, what claims, and what specific accusations he is referring to remain unclear. Another thread investigators are still working to untangle. As the weeks of investigation accumulate through the winter of 2024-2025, the picture that emerges around Carl Friedrich Denner is not the picture of a lone fugitive improvising his way through a collapsing Europe. It is the picture of a man who had access to, and may have helped construct, one of several organized escape networks that operated in the final months of the war. The network that moved Denner from Normandy to Austria had a structure. It had logistics. It had precedent. The first leg, from the front near Saint-Tanin-de-Cramesnil to the farm outside Falaise, appears to have been an individual arrangement, planned specifically for Denner and likely unique to his circumstances. But from Paris onward, the evidence suggests he was moving along channels that were already established and already moving other people. The boarding house on the Rue de la Roquette in Paris, operated by Emil Bruckner, is not a new discovery in the context of escape network research. Bruckner had first appeared in documentation assembled by the Allied Control Commission's Intelligence Division in 1946, and his name is present in the files of at least two subsequent investigations, one conducted by the West German Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution in the early 1960s, and one by a private research organization in the 1990s. What was not previously known was the specific connection between Bruckner's Paris operation and the Austrian mountain networks further east. The Fishhorn logbook provides this link explicitly. On two occasions, Denner refers to the Paris stopover as the crossing point established by E.B., initials consistent with Emil Bruckner, and describes it as the same house that S and the others used before me. The identity of S is not established with certainty, but archival analysis conducted in cooperation with the German Federal Archives suggests a possible connection to another Hitlerjugend officer, who was also officially declared dead in Normandy, but whose post-war fate remained undocumented. From Munich, where Horst Langer operated his machine tool workshop, the network extended southeast toward Austria along routes that followed the old trade roads through the Bavarian highlands. This corridor, through Rosenheim, Kufstein, and into the Inn Valley, was a natural pathway, and it was one that appears in multiple post-war investigations of escape networks under various names. The BKA investigation has identified at least 4 specific properties along this route that served as intermediate safe houses: a farm east of Rosenheim, a guest house in the village of Kiefersfelden just north of the Austrian border, a forestry station in the Kaisergebirge range, and a private house in Kufstein itself, the property of a retired Wehrmacht NCO who had served with Denner in the 1st Panzer Division in 1940. The Austrian section of the network, from the Inn Valley through the Salzach corridor to the Zell am See area, appears to have been the most organizationally sophisticated segment. Franz Riedler, the suspected Schreiner, operated not merely as a facilitator, but as what investigators describe as a network node, a person who knew multiple segments of the route without any single other participant knowing the complete picture. This compartmentalization is a characteristic feature of serious wartime intelligence and resistance operations, and its presence here suggests that whoever designed this network was not an amateur. The underground garage at Fishhorn was not, investigators now believe, constructed solely for Carl Friedrich Denner's use. Evidence from the structure's physical design, specifically the presence of 6 rifle mounts, the size of the floor space, and the discovery beneath the floor of a second, smaller sealed compartment, found in February 2025 during extended forensic excavation, suggests it was designed to accommodate multiple individuals simultaneously. This second subcompartment contained additional supplies: canned food, a medical kit, a roll of Swiss franc banknotes in pre-1945 denominations, and 3 blank identity card forms of the type used in the Austrian civil registration system. These blank forms had been partially prepared. They contained official-looking stamps and the relevant authorities' printed header, but had not been completed with any individual's name or photograph. The structure, in other words, was a staging post, a point at which people moving through the network could be paused, documented with new identities, resupplied, and then redirected to the next segment of their journey. Where did that next segment lead? The investigative picture here becomes less complete, but the direction is clear: south. The logbook entries from late 1944 and early 1945 contain repeated references to arrangements beyond the Tauern, the Hoch-Tauern mountain range that forms the spine of the Austrian Alps. South of those mountains lies Carinthia, and south of Carinthia lies the border with Yugoslavia and Italy. By the spring of 1945, as the final collapse of the Third Reich approached, Italy, and specifically the network of sympathizers and facilitators operating through certain channels of the Catholic Church and far-right Italian organizations, was a known terminus for German military escapees. The route from Austria through the Alps to Italy and thence to South America is one that historians of the Nazi escape networks have documented extensively. The Fishhorn evidence suggests that Denner's network fed into this larger structure. Financial reconstruction undertaken by the Austrian Federal Financial Intelligence Unit in January 2025 identified a series of transactions in the Swiss banking records of a holding company registered in Zug, Switzerland, in 1944. The company's beneficial ownership was obscured through multiple layers of nominee shareholders, but forensic accounting analysis identified the source of several deposit transactions as gold coins of the specific type and minting found in the Fishhorn cabinet. The account was active until 1961, at which point it was closed, and the remaining balance, the equivalent of approximately 80,000 Swiss francs, was transferred to an account in a bank in Buenos Aires. 16 people, according to the best current estimate of the investigation's lead analyst, Dr. Werner Hofer of the Austrian Federal Archives, used the Fishhorn network during the period between its construction in mid-1944 and its apparent sealing and abandonment sometime in 1945. Not all of them were, like Denner, ordinary officers trying to survive. The most troubling element of the investigation's findings in this area concerns a reference in the Fishhorn logbook to the visitors from Leibstandart, the Leibstandart SS Adolf Hitler, the 1st SS Panzer Division. Officers of the Leibstandart were, by 1944, deeply implicated in documented war crimes across multiple theaters. The logbook entry is terse. 3 from LSSAH passed through 4 February. Der Schreiner handled the documents. I did not ask their names. This entry has been forwarded to the relevant war crimes research units at the International Criminal Court and the German Central Office for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes in Ludwigsburg for further analysis. After March 1945, the date of the last logbook entry, the direct documentary trail of Karl Friedrich Denner goes cold for nearly 2 years. The gap is not unusual. The period between the spring of 1945 and the autumn of 1946 was one of almost unprecedented documentary chaos in Central Europe. Populations were displaced, administrative systems had collapsed, new authorities were establishing themselves with incomplete records, and the physical movement of millions of people, prisoners of war, displaced persons, returning soldiers, refugees, made tracking any individual extremely difficult. This chaos was, for someone like Denner, both a challenge and an opportunity. The first post-gap evidence emerges from the letters recovered from the Iron Cabinet. The letter that investigators date to late 1946 contains a reference to the southern city where the light is like nothing I knew before, and to a profession, I have found work suitable to my skills with a company that builds and maintains mechanical systems. It is not so different from what I did before, and no one here knows what that means." The phrase "Southern City," combined with the Buenos Aires bank account identified through the Swiss financial records, strongly suggests that by late 1946, Denner had made his way to Argentina. This is not, historically, surprising. The Buenos Aires of the late 1940s and early 1950s was home to a substantial German immigrant community that included, alongside entirely innocent refugees and economic migrants, a number of former Wehrmacht and SS personnel who had used various post-war escape channels. The Perón government's liberal immigration policies and its complex relationship with wartime Germany made Argentina a terminus for several documented escape networks. Argentine civil registration records, accessed through a bilateral cooperation agreement between Austria and Argentina signed specifically to facilitate this investigation in December 2024, contain a registration entry for a Johann Kirchner, an Austrian national, arriving in Buenos Aires aboard a merchant vessel on October 14, 1946. The registration card describes the individual as male, born February 17, 1910, Carl Friedrich Denner's exact birth date, and gives his profession as mechanical engineer. The photograph on the Argentine registration card has been subjected to forensic facial comparison analysis by Dr. Solfrank's team. The comparison with the Wehrmacht personnel photograph, accounting for an aging differential of approximately 6 years and weight loss, yields a 91% probability match. The scar along the left jaw is clearly visible in both images. Under the name Johann Kirchner, Denner appears to have lived in the greater Buenos Aires area through the late 1940s and 1950s. Property records show a rental address in the neighborhood of San Telmo from 1947, followed by a purchase of a small property in the suburb of Lomas de Zamora in 1953, a purchase made in cash, consistent with the financial reserves established through the Swiss account. Business registration records from the Buenos Aires Municipal Archive show a mechanical engineering services company registered to Johann Kirchner in 1951, providing maintenance and installation services to the city's growing industrial sector. There are 3 more letters in the Fishhorn cabinet beyond those that investigators have been able to date to the 1946-1948 period. The final letter, based on internal dating analysis, appears to have been written sometime in the mid-1950s. Its most striking passage, translated, "I am old in ways that my age does not account for. If you ever read these words, know that I became what the war required, and then I became something else entirely." The man who came back from France was not the man who left, but he was still a man. I am content with what I have built here. I do not ask for forgiveness. I ask only that you know I loved the child and her mother every day of every year, and that this has never been something I could speak of to anyone in this place where I have lived. It is the last written communication from Carl Friedrich Denner that has been found. Argentine death registry records, searched by investigators in January 2025, contain an entry for a Johann Kirchner, an Austrian national, age listed as 67, who died in the municipal hospital of Lomas de Zamora on November 3, 1977. Cause of death is listed as cardiac arrest. He is buried in the municipal cemetery of Lomas de Zamora under the name Johann Kirchner. The grave is unadorned. There is no marker beyond a standard municipal stone. He died as he had lived since Normandy, as someone else. And he died in autumn, in a southern hemisphere spring, in a city built by immigrants and crossed by boulevards wide enough to forget a person in, 33 years after the world had already buried him in a field in France. The case of Carl Friedrich Denner forces an uncomfortable reckoning with questions that have no clean answers. He was not, as far as the investigation has been able to establish, a war criminal in the formal legal sense. His unit, the 12th SS Panzer Division Hitlerjugend, was implicated in atrocities, most notably the massacre of Canadian prisoners at the Ardennes Abbey on June 7th and 8th, 1944, in which at least 20 Canadian soldiers were executed. These killings were committed primarily by officers and men of the division's reconnaissance battalion, and were subsequently prosecuted at the Orich trial of 1945. Denner's second company was not directly involved in those specific killings, and no evidence uncovered in the Fishhorn investigation implicates him personally in any war crime. But this is a narrow absolution, if it is an absolution at all. Denner served willingly and effectively in a criminal organization. He was a capable officer in a division that was guilty of systematic murder. He benefited from and likely contributed to a network that also facilitated the escape of individuals who were war criminals. His own logbook entry about the Leibstandarte visitors makes clear that he knew the network he was part of did not distinguish carefully between ordinary soldiers and perpetrators. In choosing to remain silent and to use the same channels, he became, in some sense, complicit in the impunity of others. There is also the question of what his survival cost. The soldier designated in the logbook as P, the man who may have died wearing Denner's rank insignia, providing the physical evidence for the false death record, remains unidentified. If this reconstruction is accurate, then Denner's survival was purchased at the price of someone else's unattributed death. The families of German soldiers reported killed in Normandy were entitled to know how their relatives died. The families of any soldier whose death was falsely documented to facilitate someone else's escape were denied that knowledge forever. And then there are the victims of the war itself, the French civilians killed in the fighting around Caen, the Canadian soldiers who died in the Normandy battles, the Eastern Front populations who suffered under the occupation that units like Denner's were part of enforcing. These people did not escape to South America. They did not build quiet lives in suburban Buenos Aires. Many of them did not survive the war at all, and those who did carried their wounds, documented and undocumented, for the rest of their lives. Against this, what can fairly be said in mitigation? Denner was a product of his time in the most precise sense. He came of age during the economic and political catastrophe of Weimar Germany, was recruited into a military apparatus that framed service as patriotic duty, and fought in wars he did not design and could not individually stop. He lost his wife and daughter to an Allied bombing raid. He experienced years of industrial combat violence that would, in any modern framework, constitute serious traumatic injury. He was, in the most immediate sense, a man trying not to die in a collapsing war. None of this erases his service record. None of it addresses the moral weight of his choice to disappear rather than face whatever post-war accountability might have awaited him. But it does complicate the picture in ways that honest historical analysis requires us to acknowledge. What the Fishhorn investigation raises, perhaps more than any specific verdict on Denner himself, is a systemic question. How many others did the same? The network that moved Denner from Normandy to Argentina was not a singular improvisation. It was infrastructure. It had facilities, personnel, financial backing, and operational security. 16 people, by current estimates, used the Fishhorn facility alone. The Buenos Aires bank account that received the Swiss transfer in 1961 was not the only such account. The Argentine civil records contain hundreds of names that may never be cross-referenced against Wehrmacht casualty records with sufficient care. The graves in French and German war cemeteries bearing the names of men declared killed in action contain, in some number of cases that we cannot currently estimate, either the bodies of other, unnamed soldiers, or no bodies at all. This is not comfortable knowledge. The war, we were told, was over. The casualties were counted. The perpetrators were tried or fled or died. The record was closed, but records closed under incomplete information are not finished histories. They are mysteries waiting for the right drill to break through the wrong resistance and drop into a sealed chamber that has been holding its breath for 80 years. April 2025. 7 months after Johann Breitner's drill broke through into the underground silence of the Fishhorn structure. The site has been designated a protected cultural monument under Austrian heritage law. The underground structure itself will not be demolished. After the completion of forensic examination, a process that investigators estimate will require at least another 18 months of analysis, cross-referencing, and international archival cooperation. It will be sealed again, this time with full documentation, with an interpretive plaque to be installed at the surface. The Austrian Federal Ministry of Culture has announced that the site will eventually be incorporated into a broader educational initiative focused on the post-war escape networks that operated through the Alpine region. There are conversations currently underway between the Austrian Federal Archives, the German Federal Archives, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and the International Tracing Service about establishing a joint research program specifically devoted to cross-referencing Wehrmacht casualty records against immigration records in the known terminus countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Syria, Egypt, for the period between 1945 and 1960. The Fishhorn discovery has, in the assessment of Dr. Werner Hofer, the investigation's lead archivist, demonstrated that the systematic gap between official death records and actual post-war trajectories is likely larger than any existing scholarly estimate has accounted for. On a gray morning in late April 2025, a small group gathers at the fenced perimeter of the Fishhorn site. Ernst Denner, the 68-year-old nephew from Wurzburg, is there. He has been briefed in detail on the investigation's findings. He has been shown the letters from the Iron Cabinet, not the originals, which remain in forensic custody, but clean printed translations. He has seen the photograph from the Argentine registration card. He has been told about the grave in Lomas de Zamora, unmarked by any true name, holding a man who chose to become nobody so that he could go on being someone. When asked by the Austrian Broadcasting Corporation's documentary team how he feels about what has been discovered, Ernst Denner stands for a long moment looking at the fence around the excavation site. The mountains are behind him, still carrying snow on their upper slopes even in late April. He says, "I think he was very afraid. I think he was afraid for a very long time. I think that is the saddest part, not what he did, but that he had to be afraid for 30 years, and there was no one he could tell. This is the human residue of historical catastrophe. Not the monuments, not the archives, not even the forensic breakthroughs that cross decades to reopen closed accounts. It is the specific, personal weight of choices made under conditions of impossible pressure, carrying across generations to land on the shoulders of people who had no part in making them and no power to resolve them." The sealed garage in Fishhorn held a Horch 108 staff car, 43 documents, 27 gold coins, 11 letters, 3 photographs, and the ghost of a man who had been officially dead for 81 years. It held the evidence of a network sophisticated enough to move human beings across half a continent and deposit them in lives built from fiction. It held, in the handwriting of a man who lost everything he loved before he ran, the acknowledgement that running had its own costs, and that distance from a dead name does not equal distance from the choices that made the name worth abandoning. The Austrian Alps have been keeping secrets since before there were states to record them. The passes through the Hohe Tauern have moved armies and refugees and contraband and fugitives for 3,000 years. The soil here is patient with what it conceals. A garage built by a man who understood logistics and understood silence sat beneath a quiet piece of Austrian countryside for 81 years. Through the liberation of Europe, through the Nuremberg trials, through the economic miracle, through the Cold War, through reunification, through the digital age that promises to make secrets impossible, and it waited. It waited for a drill to find the wrong resistance. It waited for the earth to exhale. And now it has given up what it was holding, and investigators are sifting through 81 years of silence looking for the names of the 16 people who passed through, the names of those 3 visitors from the Leibstandart, the identity of the man the logbook calls only P, the man who perhaps died so that someone else could not. Somewhere in South America or the Middle East, or in a quiet suburb of a European city, there may be other sealed rooms, other garages, other iron cabinets chained to bolts in concrete walls, other logbooks written in a compressed hand by men who understood better than most that the earth will keep a secret for as long as you ask it to. The question is not whether those rooms exist. The question is what we will find when the drill breaks through, and whether, after so many decades, justice has any remaining form that the living can provide to the dead. Sometimes the ground keeps secrets for 81 years. And then one Tuesday morning in September, it stops.